Okay, so now I think it's my pleasure to introduce the main act. And so I've seen John speak a couple of times, and I think what he's driving for, the change he's driving for in society is probably one of, in my view, one of the most important sort of system changes we can make today. Corporations today, like it or not, shape most of what's around us. I mean, certainly for my entire career, every single penny I've earned has been through a corporation. And if we look around this room, we probably won't find much substantial that a corporation hasn't made. And yet, as we all know, their primary responsibility is to make money legally. There's something new called a B Corp, a benefit corp, which extends that not just for financial responsibility, but to social and environmental responsibilities and demands, or allows corporations to embed all three into their values. Anyway, I'm no expert, so John is the expert on this, and it's my great privilege to invite John to come and talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3, good. All right. Is it too loud? Well, anyway, welcome everybody. Easter is an appropriate day for this talk because Easter is a time of death and rebirth, and from a systemic level, what's happening in society is a seismic sea change in the world of corporations. And we've had a paradigm in the world of corporations for a couple of hundred years where corporations existed to maximize profit for shareholders and foist as many of the negative consequences of behavior off on society and the environment as they could possibly get away with. And that has been the default moral conscience of corporations around the world for quite some time. And that paradigm actually worked quite well as long as the underlying assumption that the commons had the capacity to absorb all of the negative consequences of corporate behavior, and resources are infinite and replenishable. And with 7 billion humans on the planet, we're sort of up against the limits of that paradigm. Another phenomenon that's occurring simultaneously, or as part of the same phenomenon, as part of the death of this system, is that we've seen people waking up to their power. And that's the 1%, it's the 99%, it's Occupy. And what all of that angst in the collective is about is people are waking up and realizing that when we founded this country 200 some odd years ago, the founding fathers never asked the fundamental philosophical question about corporations, which is, what should the rights and moral responsibilities of our corporate citizens be? And at the time we became a republic, there were only about 50 corporations in America. They'd all gotten their charters from the King of England. And the prevailing form at the time was a 15th century artifact that was created by the kings of England and Europe as an agent of empire. And the original corporation was called a corpus, or corporation, for a reason. There's no head, it's just a body. And if you look at the Hudson's Bay Company, for example, the King of England chartered a bunch of guys to go exploit the Hudson's Bay watershed. And the king gave a royal patent, a monopoly, to the Hudson's Bay Company to go and exploit the hell out of the entire Hudson's Bay watershed. And the quid pro quo was that the king got a share of, the Royal Treasury got a share of the plunder, and the Hudson's Bay Company helped claim a large part of 15% of North America for the English crown, an extended empire. And if you think about it, the last thing the king wanted to do when he created a corporation was create a rival economic or political power. So the king put the corporation on a very, very short leash. And if I were the head of the Hudson's Bay Company and I misbehaved, the king could revoke the charter. He could call me back to England, put me in the Tower of London, decapitate me. But the king served as the external conscience of the corporation. And the corporation had a very limited charter, and its power was bounded and subject to the absolute control of the monarch. Well, a funny thing happened in the American Revolution. We got rid of the king, but we kept that lobotomized corporate form. And the external conscience of the king devolved into state legislatures, right? So until 1811, if you wanted to create a corporation in this country, you had to go to the state legislature, put a bill in place, and the legislature would grant you a charter, and it typically had a very prescribed public purpose, and the corporation had a very limited life. Well, a funny thing happened in 1811 when New York invented free incorporation and limited liability. Because what that meant was anybody that could fog a mirror could go to the New York Secretary of State and incorporate a company. You no longer needed to get an act of legislation in order to create a corporation. And New York also eliminated the liability of shareholders for the debts and liabilities of the company. So all of a sudden, previously, if I were a shareholder in a company and the company owed $500,000, I was liable for that debt. With limited liability, all of a sudden, as a shareholder, I'm no longer liable for the debts of the company. And what that did was open up a flood of investment. It made it possible for people to invest in corporations without any liability. So what that simple invention, those two simple legal inventions in 1811 did was essentially foster the industrial age across the planet, because over the next 50 years, almost every jurisdiction, every country on the planet adopted some form of free incorporation and limited liability. So as a result, we have a global economic system that through colonization and so forth is populated by corporations that at their core are a basic 15th century construct. And the corporation has no internal conscience mechanism other than in Anglo-Saxon jurisdictions, the fiduciary duty of directors to shareholders to maximize profit, right? So that profit maximization motive has evolved globally as the default conscience of corporations, right? So we have these human collectives that have vast amounts of power, but as a society, as a people, we've never asked or answered the fundamental philosophical question: is what should the moral responsibility or the conscience, the collective conscience of a corporation be? And you know, as I said earlier, we've gotten away with a global economic system with corporations that have no internal conscience, as long as the commons had the capacity to absorb behavior and we had, you know, plenty of resources. But in a massively interdependent world that moves at the speed of light, this doesn't work anymore. So what's evolving? Well, what's really cool is there's a quiet revolution going on. It's actually an evolution. And it started with constituency statutes. There are 31 states in the United States that now have constituency statutes which allow the board of directors of a corporation, in considering actions taken by the corporation, to consider the interests of many of the corporation's other stakeholders in addition to just the shareholders, right? So it allows directors in the exercise of their fiduciary duty to start really thinking of the corporation as an ecosystem and thinking of its effects on society and the environment, employees, communities in which companies do business, and so on and so forth. Well, constituency statutes don't really, they create the start of the architecture of an internal collective conscience in corporations, but they don't go all the way. And a couple of years ago, actually the first statute in America for benefit corporations came in Maryland in 2010. What's happening is there's a new form of corporation emerging called the benefit corporation that starts to create the legal architecture to create a social and environmental conscience that transcends and includes the pecuniary one, in which directors are obligated to maximize profit for shareholders, or at least that's the perception. So what a benefit corporation does is it's absolutely identical to a regular C corporation with 3 minor exceptions. And if you think of genetic engineering, when people create a new form of corn or whatever, they'll splice one gene. And that one gene will change the expression of the entire animal. Well, when we drafted California Benefit Corporation legislation, it was like the genetic engineering equivalent with the corporate code, because we kept the entire body of California common law and corporate law. And if you think of that as like the Microsoft operating system or the Apple operating system, we kept that entire system intact, and we created a little tiny application layer of code, a few sentences of statute that sits on top of that existing body of law. So from a change perspective, it's a tiny little change. And whenever you're doing systems change, if you can make a tiny change, you minimize the resistance. So what we figured out was 2 sentences of change in the existing corporation code change the expression of the corporation to one that has a very limited, primitive, pecuniary conscience that only focuses on the effect of corporate action on shareholders, to a much more of a planetary conscience where corporations are now, that elect to be benefit corporations, are required to examine the effects of corporate behavior on society and the environment. So the one sentence in a benefit corporation statute that changes the expression of the animal is the one that says that a benefit corporation, which is a for-profit entity, must provide a material positive impact on society and the environment from its operations taken as a whole. That's one sentence, a very, very simple addition to existing corporate code. And the second sentence that changes everything is that the directors of a benefit corporation have to consider the interests of all of the corporation's stakeholders in determining whether a corporate action is in the interests of a corporation. And these 2 sentences don't sound like much, but if you think about behavior, if every corporation on the planet all of a sudden had to think about not only the consequences of behavior on shareholders, but on society and the environment, all of a sudden you're getting a very different animal. And the corporate conscience within that entity is suddenly elevated from very narrow and collectively egocentric to much more expansive. And this little change is causing a very quiet revolution, which I believe in the context of the internet age is going to take relatively few years to flow across the planet, unlike the 50 or 60 years that it took in the 1800s for limited liability and free incorporation to spread across the globe. And already we've got 12 states that have adopted benefit corporation legislation, and 17 more, including Delaware, are considering adopting legislation this year. Delaware is a big deal. Delaware is the premier jurisdiction of incorporation for Fortune 500 companies, and the rest of the world looks to Delaware for thought leadership in corporate law. So Delaware's state bar just promulgated draft benefit corporation legislation 2 weeks ago, and the belief is that Delaware will pass benefit corporation law sometime this year. And this is huge. And what's beautiful about Delaware's statute is that the drafters actually anticipate existing public companies using this new law to transmute their corporate form from a regular corporation into a benefit corporation, because the statute actually sets forth the process by which a public company would become a benefit corporation. And my belief is that there is an iconic public company out there today that is going to see the historic opportunity that it has to become a global thought leader in sustainability. Just as 10 years ago when Google put forth the proposition that it stood for doing no evil, and that very simple double negative put Google in the vanguard of great places to work and sustainability, there's an opportunity for public companies to seize the leadership position in sustainability and responsibility by adopting this new kind of form. And essentially, just to give you the essence of the three characteristics of a benefit corporation that are different from a regular corporation, as I said, the benefit corporation has to provide a material positive impact on society and the environment from its operations taken as a whole. And that effect on society and the environment has to be measured against a third-party standard and reported publicly and to your shareholders at least annually. That's the general outline of the model statute. And this is huge, because, and we're just at the front end of this. But what this starts to do is elevate takes the corporate conscience out of the gutter, and really puts a responsibility on the collective to be a good global citizen, good corporate citizen. The other thing that's happening is there's a movement called Conscious Capitalism. There's going to be a conference next week in San Francisco. And John Mackey of Whole Foods, this is sort of his pet project. He was the prime mover and inspiration behind the movement. He's provided the funding for the not-for-profit that is the driver behind it. But conscious capitalism is nothing new in Silicon Valley. We've all heard of the HP way. You know, Hewlett and Packard had the mindset of the World War II generation, the greatest generation, right? They treated HP as an ecosystem of stakeholders. They were the steward leaders of that ecosystem, and HP had a much higher purpose than just making money. And those essentially are the three of the four tenets of conscious capitalism. You know, it's nothing new. The fourth tenet is you try to create a conscious culture. And what I'm trying to do for the conscious capitalism movement is ground it in legal architecture, right? Because as all of us here know the story of HP, you can have a fabulous culture, you can have a fabulous set of leaders and a set of values by which corporate behavior is guided, but unless you elevate those core values to the same stature as law, those core values get flushed down the toilet in times of corporate crisis or in change of leadership, because they're not codified and elevated to sacred constitutional status. So my belief is that the future is now. We've got new corporate forms emerging that actually contain the architecture of a planetary conscience, and we've got the legal architecture emerging whereby creative lawyers can take the core values of a company like Hewlett-Packard or Whole Foods, turn those core values into a code of conduct, incorporate them into the articles and bylaws of the corporation, and suddenly you elevate the values to the status of law, and you create a succession plan and an internal architecture to actually support behaviors that are responsible and sustainable. So there's a third piece to this as well, which is that we live in an incredibly exciting time because psychology, developmental theory, study of consciousness, neuroscience, social neuroscience, neuroleadership are all emerging as fields, and what we're on the verge of is a time when we actually understand enough about the human being, the human mind, and the human psyche so that we can actually design corporations that are optimized for how human beings work best. And what the neuroscience is showing is, and this is not new news to anybody who's a teacher or a parent, is that human beings work best when we work in environments where we're loved and trusted. And the neuroscience shows that when we work in a safe environment where we're loved and trusted and supported, our brains and psyche remain in the frontal cortex and in the heart. Our brains produce dopamine and oxytocin, which are happy chemicals that make us like our peers, like our work, and help us bond with each other. And we minimize the amount of time that we spend in fight or flight. And essentially, we human beings are walking danger detectors. 90% of our brain and nervous system is hardwired to detect danger. And unless you've stabilized your consciousness enough, we typically go through each day getting triggered constantly into fight or flight, right? So, the basic neuroscience shows that if you have a leader who has stabilized his or her consciousness sufficiently, they can actually start to lead other human beings from a position of calm and centeredness that makes people feel safe, loved, and trusted. And the basic preliminary psychological and business data shows that people in those kinds of environments are about twice as productive. And you have much longer tenures as employees, there's less turnover, and when people are feeling good about their work, they can access the higher brain faculties, creativity, collaboration, cooperation. And if any of you sing or do sports or have ever experienced a collective flow state in a choir or in band or whatever, when we're in those kinds of environments, we can actually create a collective flow state that creates optimal performance, because we're endowed with this incredible tribal social neurology in our brains that automatically put us into a tribal unit whenever we get together in a group. And what our brains do is, when we're in a group, as is happening right now, you guys in this pedagogical framework, whether you're aware of it or not, have temporarily assigned me the role of the leader. I'm up at the podium, I'm holding the field, your brains have tuned in to my state of being, my emotional state, and if I asked you whether I'm nervous or confident or what, you'd all be able to tell me instantly. And this is what happens in every workplace. Whether we're conscious of it or not, the social neurons in our brains tune into the leader. And if the leader is terrified, guess what? Everybody in the company is terrified, and they know it in about 3 nanoseconds. And you don't have to look any farther than our local football team, the 49ers, right? So 2 years ago, we had a 3-13 football team led by a coach, Singletary, whose tools of leadership were fear and anger. And, you know, what was the result? 3-13. New coach comes in, Harbaugh. Where does he stand? He stands from courage, right? He doesn't motivate people with fear and intimidation and anger. He believes in people. And his consciousness is relatively stabilized, so he walks into the 49ers organization, and the same group of people that were 3-13 and the same demoralized quarterback in 1 year go from being the laughingstock of the league to being Super Bowl contenders. So these are some of the hidden dynamics that are emerging from the fields of psychology and neuroscience, social neuroscience. And all of these disciplines are coming together right here in Silicon Valley. And we're right at the front end of a complete transformation of the entire corporate system, which now operates on a current of fear and greed, you know, bull and bear, right? And what is that reflective of? It's reflective of our brain and nervous system. It's 90% flight or flight, 5% reward, there's greed, and we have this tiny little frontal cortex, which is constantly getting hijacked by the amygdala and the limbic system. And, you know, how do we stay present? How do we stay there? Well, we're actually beginning to understand all of this, and not in a spiritual tradition, but we're actually understanding the science of this stuff. And where the rubber is going to hit the road is business schools are going to change their curriculums, law schools are going to change their curriculums. We're actually going to be able to train future leaders who understand these hidden dynamics of leadership so that they can be humane leaders who know how to lead the people that have chosen them as leaders in a way that is optimized to bring out their best. And we're actually going to be able to create corporations that start to run on love and trust instead of fear and greed. And all of this is coming together right here, right now in Silicon Valley. And you know, I've been very fortunate to have been involved in creating the legal architecture to ground all of this stuff. Because if you don't change the legal architecture, you can have very well-meaning people like Hewlett and Packard and John Mackey of Whole Foods that have fabulous value systems and great corporate cultures. But if there's an economic downturn and Whole Foods has to take money in again from private equity people, they may not be so lucky the next time. They may have to take money in from a private equity person that doesn't care a damn about core values and culture and is only concerned about making a buck. And all of that investment in culture gets flushed down the toilet unless it's baked into the legal architecture and it becomes a sacred constitutional system. So if you think of a company like Johnson & Johnson, which came out in 1939 with its credo, that was a brilliant document. It talks about all of Johnson & Johnson stakeholders, nurses, doctors, patients, you know, the goodness that Johnson & Johnson is trying to put out into the world. Well, J&J is vulnerable because they never codified their credo. They never put it into the articles and bylaws. They've had a lot of trouble recently because they've had management that's only cared about the bottom line, and they've sort of lost touch with the credo. And what happens with the lawyers and financial types, we're left-brained, we come in, and we've all bought into this Milton Friedman view of the world where corporations exist solely to maximize profit for shareholders, period, end of story. And you know, that paradigm gives us the license to leave our morality at the door. And anyway, so we're at a very, very exciting time, and I'm very excited that I've gotten to be a part of this. And what I thought I would do is, there's nothing worse than listening to a lawyer talk for an hour, and I've been on for about half an hour, and I just thought I'd open it up for a dialogue and questions. And thanks for your attention. Yes, in the blue there.
Have I got sound? Yeah, I'll bring the mic round.
Thanks for your talk. I'm quite enthusiastic about benefit corporations.
Could you speak up a little?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Corporations are very fond of greenwashing and doing things that make them look good. But I guess my question is, we've all read about directors of banks and the people who are doing credit ratings sort of sitting around and collecting their paychecks and not actually doing anything to enforce the corporate code. So it's great to have a good corporate code, but do you have any comments on what can be done to actually make that happen and be enforced and not just be pretty words?
Yes. Well, we the people are waking up. Okay, so one of the things that I don't think has really been voiced is the ultimate sovereignty for corporations resides in us. Okay? Corporations get their charter from the Secretary of State of the 50 states in the United States. Who is the Secretary of State? The Secretary of State is a public servant. Who do public servants serve? They serve we the people. They serve us. And what we've forgotten in all of this is that the ultimate sovereignty for corporations comes from the people. We are the ultimate grantors of corporate authority. And we are slowly waking up and remembering that we have the power to charter corporations ultimately. That's what Occupy and the 99% are really indirectly voicing. And we are starting to reclaim that power. I like to think of the internet as the collective consciousness of humanity. And if you overlay the chakra system onto the internet, what we've got is a bunch of first, second, and third chakra companies. You've got Google, which is all about its first chakra. It's all about survival. How do we get the information we need to survive in an internet age? We've got the second chakra, which is relationships and sexuality, which is Facebook, which was started by a Harvard guy who wanted to get laid. And it's all about managing your relationships. We've got the third chakra, which is power, status, professional standing. That's LinkedIn, right? But there really aren't significant companies, many significant companies at the heart chakra, throat chakra, truth, right? But they're emerging. And the one company that I've been watching, a couple of companies I've been watching in particular, one is Avaz, which now has 20 million members across the globe, and Credo. I'm not sure how many members Credo has, but Avaz has, basically what it does is it finds pressure points. It finds very hot moral issues, and it will seek signatures on petitions. For example, that a woman that gets imprisoned in an Islamic country for not wearing a veil or whatever, and she's threatened with stoning, they'll solicit a petition and present 1 million or 2 signatures to the government, and it's starting to make a difference. So what's happening is the collective conscience of humanity is actually starting to wake up and find itself on the internet. And this is also showing up in the economy. We've got 70+ million consumers in America that are adherents of the lifestyles of sustainability. And people are voting with their pocketbook. I mean, people will pay more to shop at Whole Foods because They perceive it supports local farmers, organic farming, sustainable farming practices. It's not perfect, but people would rather support something that supports life. So I don't know if that answers your question, but no?
Hi. Your talk is extraordinarily interesting. I want to start out by saying that, I have never heard of a B Corp, and I think it sounds like an incredibly great idea. I was wondering if about, the incentives for somebody to change from a C Corp to a B Corp, other than, putting a green label on there, we're for marketing purposes. I'm thinking about if there were some type of an educational requirement that maybe board members once a year must attend a seminar on B Corps where they go, gather, in some place with various motivational B Corp speakers, and it becomes a networking opportunity, and they get to, write off all their expenses and their taxes, so that they really want to go to do this. That gives them a way to share ideas and, improve their ability to be B Corps and cause the B Corp an evolutionary process to occur. I was just wondering about, how you would incentivize the transition, to make it happen quicker.
Well, first, you're prescient about the B Corp community. The folks at B Lab, which is a not-for-profit that has supported benefit corporation legislation across the country, has a community of certified B corporations, which are corporations that have passed its sustainability assessment. And there are about 700 companies, mostly in the United States, but it's spreading to Europe, Australia, South America, that are certified B Corps. So there is a community, there's an annual gathering, there are programs developing to support one another within that community. But you raise a really good point about training, right? Because what we really need is a new form of leadership academy, because the entire system is embedded with the mindset of the old paradigm, which is corporations exist to maximize profit for shareholders. And I'm a lawyer. We lawyers are incredibly risk averse. We swear an oath to uphold the laws of the state of California or whatever jurisdiction we're in. We are champions of the status quo, and over our dead body are we going to let anything change? And so there's a lot of fear about change, and in order to change the entire system, you need to change the mindset of directors and officers in corporations so that they're not just focused on maximizing profit, but they're also focused on optimizing the corporate behavior so that it provides a material positive impact on society and the environment. And that's like going from juggling one ball to juggling three. It's not that difficult, but it's a new cognitive move. And when you get into the science of behavior change, what happens in the human brain, whenever we have to do something new, it creates a fight or flight response. It triggers cortisol and adrenaline, you get resistance. And I've witnessed the amount of resistance in the legal community and the financial community to thinking this way. It's unbelievable. They get terrified of the new paradigm. So what's great about the new paradigm is, especially in the 20 and 30-year-olds, they're already thinking this way. They are already living in this world. They already have a triple bottom line mindset, and they are choosing to be in benefit corporations because they already embody these principles, and they love the new corporate form because it allows them to create a collective that expresses their individual values. And that's largely the reward for a lot of the early pioneers who have adopted the benefit corporation form, is that they actually get to incorporate in a entity that actually reflects their larger more planetary consciousness, that is cognizant and careful about the effects of their business's behavior on society and the environment. And the rewards come because there's a growing number of consumers that want to support businesses that support life. And all of us, when given a choice, would rather support a business that is a better corporate citizen than one that isn't. So, anyway.
So there's a lot of hands. I'm going to go from left to right here. I think that's 6.
Oh, wow, I think I was coming up so soon. I'm Carl, and I guess I'm still a little confused. The major reason is because I have an MBA, and so I have the corporate mindset you're talking about. But I do know one thing: as long as the commons are not required to join this scheme, they will not choose it because it always lowers your profits to become more social. If it didn't, they would already be doing this because they'd be incentivized to go in that direction to improve their profits. Like you said, people are more productive if they live in this environment. Well, if that were true, corporations would immediately go in that direction. Wouldn't it be? They would be maximizing their profit. Yeah. But I don't see that happening, and I'm a little mixed up with that whole part there.
Well, the good news is that it is happening, and there's a couple of books, Profit for Life, Nathaniel Bragdon, Firms of Endearment by Raj Sisodia and crew. There's a Harvard white paper from the business school published by Professor Eccles last fall that demonstrates that businesses that adopt principles of sustainability outperform in terms of return their conventional peers by about 5 percentage points a year. So it's counterintuitive, but businesses that actually are cognizant of the consequences of behavior on society and the environment are actually better businesses. They're more profitable, and that's what the preliminary economic data shows.
Why do you need this law?
Pardon?
Why would you need this law? Because it would be automatic.
Well, the reason you need the law is because the corporate code is embedded with the feudal consciousness of the kings of Europe, and the corporate form itself defaults to a very much a pecuniary orientation. And so you can have Hewlett-Packards and you can have Whole Foods, but in times of crisis, without elevating the cultural elements to the same stature as law, that stuff gets flushed, and things revert to a pure pecuniary orientation.
If, say, the benefits law had been implemented, let's say in the 1800s here in the United States, comes to my mind the question, would Karl Marx have written the Benefit Manifesto instead of the Communist Manifesto? and Russia would not have become a communist country, but a benefit country, and the Nazism would not exist.
Century too late.
Well, I suppose we could jump timelines and go back and reorient reality. I don't think we'll ever be able to answer those questions. I mean, we're stuck with the reality that we have, and they're good questions. I mean, I think the current paradigm really served its purpose, and it created a lot of wealth, and it created a lot of prosperity around the globe. And what's interesting about capitalism, it's constantly evolving, right? And what I love about the benefit corporation movement and conscious capitalism and all these the sciences that can get applied to businesses is that these are evolutionary advancements, and the corporation has evolved, its form has evolved over the centuries to fit the current needs of society. And that's I think that's what's happening right now is you know, society was very different in the 1800s, and it was what it was, and you know, we'll never know whether we had benefit corporations back then, whether it would have made any difference or not. I doubt it. But you know, this is a part of the evolution of capitalism into I think a sustainable global economic system.
I can't help but wish you the best of luck in your, what feels a little bit idealistic, but I think I admire it. My comment is really about your picture of internal organizations. Love and trust are quite insufficient for motivating people. They need a much more challenging job because they'll get bored. They need to get involved. And your concept of leadership. Leadership's a very complex issue depending on the organization, the tasks to be done, and so forth. I just want to add that.
Well, and, you know, and love is very tough, actually. You know, because when you're in an environment, I mean, Harbaugh doesn't tolerate fools, and he holds people accountable, right? So, you know, love is not some kumbaya, let's all hold hands. It means that, you know, if you've got a corporate culture and you've got values, you're holding people accountable to those values. It's tough love, and if somebody isn't in alignment with integrity, they're off the bus, and you don't hesitate. And so it's you know, it's not all fuzzy. Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to echo the sentiment of excitement about this possibility. I think it's a wonderful paradigm shift. Like others, I'm concerned about the optional nature of it. I'm skeptical that a large number of corporations would voluntarily shift to the B model. Do you envision any possibility of this new legal framework becoming the status quo, or compulsory, if you will?
I suspect it will over time. I like to use Geoffrey Moore's crossing the chasm analogy, right? So whenever there's a disruptive technology, the first proponents of it are the pioneers or the lunatics, the early and then they're the early adopters. So it's a tiny percentage of the population, and that's kind of where we are with all of this stuff. We've got a very small percentage of the population that's bought into it. There's a massive amount of resistance to this way of thinking, massive. And so in California, when we passed benefit corporation legislation, our strategy was to minimize the resistance, right? So we kept the statute as simple as possible. It's 3 pages, it's tiny, it doesn't change the common law, it doesn't change the corporate code, it's voluntary, right? Because the minute you make something compulsory, everybody digs in their heels, fear gets triggered, and you're never going to get anywhere. So the strategy that we've taken is, let's get the camel's nose in the tent. And let's hope that some iconic companies that are already doing business this way sense the alignment with their purpose and values and automatically transmute their corporate form into a benefit corporation. And that's what happened in California. The largest benefit corporation nationally to change forms is Patagonia. You know, Patagonia is about, I think they do about $450 million a year of business, and they were one of the charter benefit corporations in California. Yvon Chouinard, you know, recognized immediately that this corporate form was so in alignment with who Patagonia is that it was a no-brainer. The other significant company of size to become a benefit corporation is Ben & Jerry's, which is no longer an independent company. It's a subsidiary of Unilever, which is a big international conglomerate, public company. But my belief is there are corporate leaders out there that really understand, and there may not be that many of them, but they really understand the shift that is in process. And there's an enormous opportunity for one of those leaders to really use these new architectures to truly transform their companies to be a leader of the sustainable economic system that's emerging. And that's my belief, is that, and I'm thinking of setting up a management consulting firm to focus on the Global 2000 and find 2 or 3 of these companies that are ripe for this kind of top-down transformation. And if you can get a chairman of the board and president that are already aligned this way, that actually have the courage to put their convictions into writing and into word, they will have, I think, the same kind of economic advantage in the marketplace that Google had when it got lots of accolades and credit for standing for do no evil. And what the new paradigm does is take that to the next level, which is, do no evil is not good enough. It's do good, right? It's optimize profit and good, and that's the emerging paradigm. So, what I'm trying to do is minimize the resistance, minimize the friction points, make it really easy for people to get their minds around this new mindset, and then look for corporate leaders that are ready to lead their enterprises into this kind of a transformation. And all it takes is one company, one iconic company, to go through this transformative process to set an example for everybody else. And I think I wouldn't be surprised in 20 or 30 years, every jurisdiction required corporations to be benefit corporations. I mean, a lot of people that we encountered in the legislative process just said, well, why aren't you making this mandatory? Well, the reason is, if we had tried to make it mandatory, we never would have gotten the bill passed. That's the... incentives instead. Like, yeah. Currently there's no tax incentive for being a benefit corporation. There are some public contracting benefits emerging. I think San Francisco passed an ordinance giving priority bidding on city contracts to benefit corporations. I think the city of Philadelphia did the same thing. So there are incentives and accolades emerging. They're small in scale, but for now, the reward for doing this is, for the socially responsible entrepreneur, there's actually a form that they can incorporate in that is in alignment with their values and purpose. Yeah.
Hi. Well, I was at Hewlett-Packard in the 70s and 80s starting out, and I definitely appreciated how the corporate values trickled down to the people working there and even the customers, and I saw a lot of power there. That was more of a comment. I do have a Delaware tiny C corporation, not iconic by any means, and I'm definitely interested in looking at this conversion, not just because of the impact on employees that might be attracted, but also because I'm looking to involve the community in actually helping with the mission of the corporation, and I think this kind of form would make it much easier for organizations. And my question's unrelated. I see a lot of charitable organizations that are pretty darn inefficient. Don't seem to be doing a particularly good job of their mission, even if they're well-intentioned. Do you see any role for B corporations to perhaps take on some of the public good missions that might be being done poorly by charitable organizations today? In other words, use money that's raised and do term a profit and use profits towards it rather than donations as the funding model.
Well, I think you know, this was one of the secondary concerns in the legislative process with benefit corporation legislation. There was fear among the not-for-profit community that benefit corporations would take money away from charities. They'd create a competing force. And I don't really, I see this as sort of a secondary issue at this point. Benefit corporations are really looking at they can donate money to charity, they can donate money to the community, but they're really looking at what's the overall impact of the business on society and the environment. And again, that's measured against a third-party standard, which measures typically environmental impact, social impact, how well employees are being treated, what the community involvement or engagement is of that company. So I don't really see.
It means an issue. I meant maybe they might do some of these missions better.
Yeah, and I think a lot of there are a bunch of not-for-profits that actually have stores. I mean, I met with somebody from, I think it was the Oakland Museum, whose interest they're looking at possibly converting the museum into a benefit corporation, right? Because often there's you get well-intentioned people in not-for-profits, but they don't necessarily have the skill set of the MBA community. There's not the structure to run the not-for-profit very well. Yeah.
Hello, hi, thanks for the very insightful discussion. And I can definitely see the benefit of codifying this new corporate behavior into the state law or the constitutional documents for the corporations. And I'm glad you mentioned about economic downturn, especially now. Is there any plan for the state legislature to align this corporate behavior and corporate culture into the waterfall under the bankruptcy laws so that when things do not work out, the company can be, or the resource at the time can be distributed according to this higher value?
I'm not aware of anything at this point. Yeah, I was just focused on the benefit corporation legislation, and I'm not aware of anything current in the legislature that is in alignment with what you're talking about. So I don't know.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you tell me that Corporation X is a certified benefit corp and they're behaving as a good, conscientious world citizen, whereas Corporation Y, which is their competitor, is a go for the bucks only corporation, I'm going to make every effort I can to patronize Corporation X. So is there any attempt to create a consumer conscience and let people know that they have choices and they can promote good things if they choose to?
It's a great question, and the answer is yes. So when we did the benefit corporation legislation in California, we found about 20 plus assessment standards. And many of these assessment standards have their own brand. A certified B corporation has a little B, there's a B logo. So there is an effort made to creating consumer awareness that there are different types of corporations that have kind of some sort of a third-party seal of approval as being better than average corporate citizens, right? And I will tell you one thing about the third-party assessment tools. They are in infancy. We're at the very front end of this. They're not perfect by any means, and they may have a much lower bar than will emerge over the next decade or two. But there is quite an effort being made to promoting the collective brand in the certified B corporation community, for example.
The anti-corporate station KPFA is a little miffed. They said that there is a effort to amend the Constitution saying that only natural persons may be persons. And they are complaining that the corporate media is not saying one word about this.
Well, we have two choices. We the people, we have two choices. we either voluntarily, which is what I love about the whole benefit corporation conscious capitalism movement, we either voluntarily look at corporations and look at them objectively and say, look, we're doing business in essentially lobotomized collective entities that really don't have a social or moral conscience other than pecuniary interests of shareholders. And so we can either adopt a different form voluntarily and choose a new way of doing business, or in the next economic crisis, the Occupy and 99% will be even more vociferous than it was last time, and we will have legally mandated changes in the corporate system as we the people wake up and recognize that, hey, the ultimate sovereignty for creating corporations abides in us, and we should be the determinants of what the rights and moral responsibilities of these collective life forms that we're creating are. Because if you think about it, a corporation has multiple people in it. It has a much larger impact than any one citizen can have. And you would think that as a sane society, we would hold our collectives to a higher moral standard, just because the potential for harm is much greater than can be done by one person.
So, I'm sorry, lunch is actually ready and we're out of time. Thank you very much, John. That was really good.
Mark.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. You are a great, attentive audience, lots of good questions, and thanks for coming out on Easter to hear about the law.